And the welfare state is profoundly immoral. It is the initiation of the use of force by the state to rob from some people and to bribe others. It is nothing to do with helping the poor. It is nothing to do with helping the sick. It is to do with allowing governments to gain control over massive amounts of resources by force. Remember, either the force is direct in the form of taxation or it is indirect in the form of debt and deferred obligations and money printing and so on. It is the initiation of force to accumulate trillions of dollars of wealth in the hands of the government, which they then use to buy votes and allegiance from a largely immigrant population, though of course it also does occur domestically as well. The fundamental immorality of the welfare state is one of the greatest causes of immorality. Now, there is, of course, the military-industrial complex and so on, which we've talked about before. That's a little bit more obvious. The welfare state is something that appeals to our pathological altruism. It is veiled and cloaked under a huge amount of charity and kindness memes, and it is something that we find very difficult to look at directly. But it is the initiation of force. It transfers trillions of dollars at gunpoint from one section of the population to another, largely from natives to immigrants, largely from men to women. It is an entirely corrupting agency. The welfare state destroys families and communities and cultures and entire countries. And so the welfare state is what a significant proportion of the immigrants are coming for. In other words, if there was no welfare state, then immigration would be vastly different. Vastly different. They're not coming for freedom. They're coming for free stuff, and that is a very different thing. This is from the CIS study from 2012, link is below. 51% of households headed by an immigrant, legal or illegal, reported that they used at least one welfare program during the year 2012, compared to only 30% of native households. Now, that's admitting, and that's only one. So welfare includes Medicaid, cash, food, and housing programs. So welfare use is high for both new arrivals and well-established immigrants. Of households headed by immigrants who have been in the country for more than 2 decades, 48% access welfare. 2 decades. Almost half accessing welfare. Now, there's no single program that explains immigrants' higher overall welfare use. Not counting subsidized school lunch, welfare use is still 46% for immigrants and 28% for natives. Not counting Medicaid, welfare use is 44% for immigrants and 26% for natives. Immigrant households have much higher use of food programs at 40% versus 22% for natives, and Medicaid, 42% versus 23% for natives. Immigrant use of cash programs is somewhat higher than natives, 12% versus 10%, and use of housing programs is similar to natives. So for many of these programs, immigrants consuming twice the welfare of natives. And of course, natives include children born to immigrants. It includes immigrants from a previous generation. So welfare use varies among immigrant groups. Households headed by immigrants from Central America and Mexico, 73%. 73% are using welfare, almost 3/4. The Caribbean is 51%, Africa 48%. They have the highest overall welfare use. Those from East Asia, 32%, Europe 26%, and South Asia 17% have the lowest. So mestizos and blacks and whites and South Asians, East Asians, Orientals, whatever you want to call them, they have vastly different welfare uses. This is, of course, why I keep talking about ethnicity and IQ. It matters. It's important. It's what is going to determine the fate of Western civilization is an understanding of these issues. Many immigrants struggle to support their children, and a large share of welfare is received on behalf of U.S.-born children. See, even if you're illegal, in a truly astonishing display of legal suicide, even if you're illegal, of course, your child born in America is legal, and then you can use that child to access welfare programs. Even immigrant households without children have significantly higher welfare use than native households. So without children, 30% access welfare if they're immigrants versus 20% of natives. The welfare system is designed to help low-income workers, especially those with children, and this describes many immigrant households. In 2012, 51% of immigrant households with one or more workers accessed one or more welfare programs, as did 28% of working native households. The large share of immigrants with low levels of education and resulting low incomes partly explains their high use of welfare. In 2012, 76% of households headed by an immigrant who had not graduated high school used one or more welfare programs, as did 63% of households headed by an immigrant with only a high school education. Now, just remember, America, she's like the lady in red in the Matrix. America is where everybody wants to be. And the idea that, well, you just have to get some guy who didn't even finish high school from Bangladesh and that's the best you can do, well, it's mad. And it is population displacement and replacement, because the welfare money that is given to immigrants is taken from the natives, which means that the natives have fewer resources to raise children, and the immigrants have more resources to raise children. So you get these widening splits. The native birth rates go down and the immigrant birth rates go up. It is sheer population replacement. Let's not kid ourselves about that. Now, the high rates of immigrant welfare use not entirely explained by the lower education levels. Households headed by college-educated immigrants have significantly higher welfare use than households headed by college-educated natives, 26% versus 13%. So here again, you see the same pattern. Even if the immigrants have college education, whatever that means in other countries, it's still twice the welfare use of college-educated natives. 13% for college-educated natives. Good job. Low expectation arts degrees. Now, in the 4 top immigrant receiving states, use of welfare by immigrant households is significantly higher than that of native households. In California, 55% versus 30%, right? So 55% of immigrant households are receiving welfare versus 30% of natives. Again, around twice. New York, 59% versus 33%. Texas, 57% versus 34%. And Florida, 42% versus 28%. So I want you to think of your bank account, your children's future, your wallet as crops. And in many ways, immigrants into America are the locusts. Do you understand? So people who want to control immigration, people who want to reduce the welfare state, are simply trying to maintain the property that they have created and earned. They are trying to hang on to their children's future. They are trying to hang on to what they have. Most new legal immigrants are barred from welfare programs when they first arrive, and illegal immigrants are barred as well, but this ban applies to only some programs. Most legal immigrants have been in the country long enough to qualify for at least some programs. And the bar often does not apply to children. States often provide welfare to new immigrants on their own. Naturalizing makes immigrants eligible for all programs, and most importantly, immigrants, including illegal immigrants, can receive benefits on behalf of their U.S.-born children who are awarded U.S. citizenship at birth. Now, given the heavy use of welfare by the less educated immigrants, this is important. So, prior research indicates that illegal immigrants are overwhelmingly less educated, so allowing them to stay in the country creates significant welfare costs. By admitting large numbers of these less educated immigrants to join their relatives, the legal immigration system brings in many immigrants who are likely to access and need the welfare system. And proposals to allow in more or less educated immigrants to fill low-wage jobs would create significant welfare costs. See, businesses don't have much of a problem. Well, big businesses, certainly politically influential businesses, don't have as much of a problem with this mass immigration because they get to pay relatively low wages, because it is the taxpayers and the unborn through debt that end up paying a significant portion of the income that these immigrants receive. So you can pay these guys $10 an hour because they're getting 10 or 15 bucks an hour perhaps through the welfare state. So again, the profits are privatized, but the costs are socialized. So this is the weird thing, because there's this, legal immigration, that's supposed to be really, really great for the country. Well, if that is supposed to be good, it's supposed to be good for, not having enough kids, got to bring in the immigrants to pay off the pensions. First of all, the pensions can't be paid off. America has close to $200 trillion of unfunded liabilities. You could stack geniuses like Cordwood in the economy and still not be able to pay that off. So, but if immigration is supposed to be beneficial to the country, then of course, statistically, the immigrants should have far lower rates of welfare use than the natives. If it's going to be beneficial, it's not. It's beneficial for the left because these immigrants from the third world overwhelmingly vote for Democrats, for leftists, for Labor, for big government policies. Of course they do. Of course they do, because they're on the receiving end of government largesse. And so, does the dairy farmer, you say, hey, want some free cows? Sure I do. The cows may have a different view of it, but that's the way. So here's the reality. Look, the welfare state was a profoundly immoral departure from Western standards of the protection of private property, of personal responsibility, of the need for family, community, and societal reinforcement of, say, sexual morals and so on, right? I mean, in the past, a woman got pregnant out of wedlock. She had to go live with her family if she had the kid, and nobody would marry her. And her parents would have to pay. So parents have a huge incentive to patrol teenage sexuality and to ensure that there's a stable marriage before there are babies. Now, it's not the pill that changed all of this. It's the welfare state. And the welfare state decayed sexual morality to the point where we have massive amounts of predation, single motherhood, and all of the destructive results that come from children coming out of single mother households. Mathematically, statistically, there is no country in the world where the welfare state is sustainable. So the welfare state, you need to grind this into your brain. The welfare state is going to end. The welfare state is going to end. So it's either going to end without planning, it's either going to be a no wheels landing, or it's going to be a wheels down landing. It's either going to be a controlled crash or an uncontrolled crash, but it's going to crash. And the welfare state has to some degree arisen out of, because it is a transfer from natives to immigrants in many ways, it is a transfer from men to women. And it arises to some degree out of this pathological altruism for women. Women have this enormous power because, women outvote and outlast men in the political system. And of course, women have both this demand for equality combined with the cry of victimhood that provokes this pathological altruism among men. So when women want stuff, like forcing employers to pay them the same, even though they may be off having kids and so on, then they can demand for equality. But then when things go badly for women, a lot of times they can cry victim and everybody rushes in to solve their problems. So this is a huge issue. There's this pathological altruism towards women combined with the sociopathic indifference towards men, that men are just the tax cattle, the tax livestock, whose resources can be pillaged to support, a lot of times, the bad decisions of women. Right? You have babies with a guy who doesn't stick around, and then men, right? And it's so frustrating. Like, just at a personal level, I've known a lot of men, nice men, good men, stable men, solid men, good providers, good owners. They would be great husbands, great fathers. They can barely get dates. Because the men that the women are all firing the V cannon at are like these shifty lowlifes. These scary, dangerous, peak of ovulation, go for the grizzled look kind of stuff. And so what happens is the women have children with these unreliable men. The unreliable men bugger off. And then the guys who would have been great husbands and fathers are forced to pay for the offspring of these shifty, irresponsible men. And given that a lot of personality is genetic, well, this does not do great things for society as a whole. We need to understand that a man's wallet is the same as the woman's vagina when it comes to sexual market value. And, the women say, my body, my choice. Well, the men say, my wallet, my choice. But we don't care about the men. We only care about the women. And this is not equality. Not equality. Now, people say, oh, well, the West is a nation of immigrants. Well, sure. To some degree, that's true. But there was no welfare state. And so before the welfare state, after the welfare state. So could this guy, if he's from Bangladesh, this bomber, this alleged terrorist, could he have survived in America without the welfare state? And did he drive down the wages of people who otherwise might have gotten that job in the electrical company? Because, you get all these low-wage people coming in. Well, you have a lot of people in America, teenagers and other people who have terrible economic skills because government schools are so bad that after 12 years of education, you're barely competent to flip burgers. So it's just driving down the wages of the most vulnerable in America's society. And this has been roundly established by economists. More waves of low-skill immigration drives down the wages of the natives who are low-skilled and therefore in the most need of help in a way. And that may be great for businesses in the short run, but all it does is delay automation. Like the slavery. Slavery in the ancient world. In the ancient world, ancient Greece, ancient Rome, they knew all about the steam engine. They knew a lot about this kind of stuff. But they never automated because they invested their money into slaves. And if you automate, then slaves become less valuable and nobody wants to destroy the value of their own investments. So it's only when you don't have an endless supply of low-cost labor, you begin to automate and you begin to, of course, use machines to replace human labor, which is going to happen anyway. So importing all of these people when automation is going to get rid of their jobs in the long run is just a recipe for disaster. So when you come to a country like the West with a history of property rights and freedom and independence and a dedication to freedom of speech, separation of church and state and so on, if you then go into the quagmire, the morass, the quicksand, in a sense, of the welfare state, you get shielded off from needing to integrate with a freedom-loving culture, with a property rights culture. You get closed off from the culture. It becomes less of a blending and more of a kind of cyst. Now, the solution to these kinds of attacks, of course, is generally more government. We need to patrol more. We need to investigate more. We need to examine more. We need to police social media more. And this, of course, is ridiculous. Problems caused by government cannot be solved by more government. They're solved by less government. You need less government. You need the replacement of the welfare state with private charities who actually care about and help the poor. Because the history of this is the same. A civilization creates rational property rights, a fairly objective and decent system of law, which attracts good people who want to work hard. This creates a huge amount of wealth, which then is taken over by the state and used to import and bribe less competent people who are dependent on the state and therefore can be reliably counted on to vote for more and more government. This has happened countless times throughout human history. You can watch my whole presentation on the Roman Empire for more on this. All of these empires that progressively violate, well, it seems like 20 of the 10 commandments on a regular basis, especially thou shalt not steal, all empires crash. And people become increasingly fragile because they are shielded from reality by money printing, by debt, by fiat currency. And throughout human history, this cycle of the free market producing wealth, which is then taken over by the state and used to corrupt and bribe society into self-destruction, this is a lesson that has not yet been learned from history. Now, there are some lessons that have been learned from history. No Nazi gains any traction in any decent society because that lesson has been learned. The lesson of communism still has to be learned, right? Because you have significant proportions, particularly of academics in the arts and in some of the softer sciences like anthropology, significant proportions who are self-described Marxists. Marxists are educating the young. Marxists are everywhere in education. So naturally, of course, the leftist media runs around screaming, Nazi, 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 all the time, because that's what Marxists tend to do. So sooner or later, these lessons are going to be learned. This lesson has not yet stuck. And one of the reasons, of course, is that just about everything you know about history is a lie. And you can look at what's happened just over the last 10 days, 11 days. And I just did a video on this. The amount of falsehoods, lying, manipulation, misdirection, obfuscation, propagandizing, and so on is relentless. And we can see this in real time now only because of the alternative media. Only because of the alternative media. There are hecklers in the symphony of self-destruction known as mainstream culture. I'm proud to be one of them. But if you look at just over the last 10 or 11 days, how many lies have been pushed forward by the mainstream media, can you imagine what history was like? Can you imagine how many lies there are in history when we can see these lies breaking apart in real time? Look at the number of lies over the last 10 days. Now go back over the last 3,000 years. Can you imagine? History, in general, is fake news. Now, it is my hope, of course, that we will learn this time before the crash. Because we have this incredible communications medium now. We can have these conversations. It is my absolute hope that we can learn what happens to cultures and societies that betray basic moral principles like property rights in favor of pathological altruism, in favor of vote buying, regardless of what expense it has to male incentives, to family cohesion, to community cohesion. It is my hope that we will learn this lesson because now everybody is part of the storyteller of history. And not all stories are equal in their relation to the truth, right? There's the fantasy science fiction section and there's the documentary section. There's the complete made-up story and then there's based on a true story. And we hope, of course, that our narratives are based upon actual facts and true stories. So whether we learn these lessons or not, before or after the coming adjustment, the coming crash. Whether we learn these lessons or not, that's kind of up to you. We're all part of the story now. We all have access to contributing to the mainstream narrative of what is going on in the world. And we all have the opportunity to push back against the lies that are being shot into us like Lilliputian arrows into a giant empirical reality. So the welfare state is going to end.